the umbrella group for the educational groups. Coalition decided that we were moving too slowly to get pro-life legislation, so they decided to compromise. And the reason why Campaign Life was formed, because Coalition was compromising and the entire pro-life movement was against compromising. So as a result of that, Campaign Life was formed. Coalition went down, down, down until there were hardly any people left in it. Maybe 24 people left in the coalition, and there were 12,000 in Campaign Life at that time, because the people were totally opposed to compromise. The educational groups were doing a great job out there of informing the people about the child in the womb and its progression from the time of conception onward. My question yesterday to the folks on the board was, how are the educational groups doing in your province? Simply because my feeling, and talking to Alex Schadenberg, who's been all over the darn place, because his wife kicks him out regularly, the movement, the educational movement, was dying everywhere. The traditional type pro-life group that went out and educated the people in the schools and at the county fairs and everything else. I learned about the pro-life issue at the Canadian National Exhibition at a booth of Toronto Right to Life. That's where I learned all about this stuff, and that's what got me involved in the first place. So my feeling was we had to continue to make sure that that was very strong. In Toronto, we wanted a march at Mother's Day, and we said rather than Campaign Life doing it, Toronto Right to Life should do it because they have to be strong. Well, they said, well, we can't do it. So Campaign Life plugged in, ran the whole thing. It was called Toronto Right to Life's Mother's Day March, but it was Campaign Life that ran the thing for years until Laura MacArthur, the president, said, oh, we don't want to do this anymore. I said, well, you're not doing anything anyway. What's the big deal? Well, we want to do some other things, and that's what they did. So that's how Campaign Life was formed, because of the compromise. And one of the compromises that I read was, we're opposed to all abortion. However, if you have to have some, let's start with the mentally handicapped and whatnot and whatnot. So they put this in writing back then, and that's, oh yeah. So the draft is still in our office someplace. We took Coalition simply because Alliance for Life, still the umbrella group for all the pro-life groups in Canada, educational groups in Canada, worked very hard to pull Coalition in under our banner. And so when it first came up, there were people in Campaign Life, I can remember Professor Al Sellinger, the late Professor Al Sellinger, say, don't trust them, don't get involved. Matthew interviewed Father Ian Boyd, who had chaired the first meeting of Campaign Life in Winnipeg, and he said, those compromisers, I refuse to call them traitors, what the word he said? I refuse to call them a terrible name, but because they mean well, but what they're doing is wrong. And so as a result of that, Paul Dodds and I met with them in Ottawa, 4 people from Alliance, 2 from Coalition. Alex Schadenberg's father was one of the people in Alliance that pulled us together. And we talked about it and came back to here and talked to all of you about other people that were here before you.
Ed Newell.
Pardon?
Ed Newell.
Ed Newell was the guy that was responsible for it from Nova Scotia. He was the head buckcat of the Knights of Columbus in Nova Scotia at the time, and he thought this was so important to bring the 2 groups together under one title. And so it was accomplished in I think, around May of 1986. But the people were compromising because we didn't want to. You remember the woman that asked Mother Teresa, I'm afraid of when I die I won't have stopped abortion. Is God gonna judge me harshly? And Mother Teresa said, no, just, as long as you've been faithful, that's what God wants you to be, faithful. So you can't make the decision, yes, all right to kill this person or that person or whatever. And it's also not right you judge the state of somebody else's soul. You can judge their actions, but you can't judge their soul. And so as a result of that, we got together with them. We talked to them and found out they didn't have two heads at all. They were, when it was all explained to them why the Campaign Life had been formed, all those people that were compromising years earlier, they weren't around anymore. It was just this faithful little handful. And so we had an election, and they said, no, we think you should run the thing, and that's when they elected me, and that's over 30 years ago. But the compromise attitude has come back. And it's come back because other people say we have to see something. We have to show that our time that we put into this thing was effective. We have to have something. What? Yeah. You have to see? I thought it was something else about the person, the being that created all these human beings. I thought that was what this was about. Going out there and doing battle, because every single human being, as Paul Lozon mentioned, it's all in everyone. Isn't that what this is about? Or is it about your ego and whatnot? That's why the organization was, the organizations were amalgamated, and that's why we have continued doing whatever. And then from there came everything else: Liberals for Life, Conservatories for Life, Family Coalition Party of Ontario, Campaign Life at the UN, and our NGO, LifeSite News, the Interim. All these things came bubbling up as a result of that, and most of them were able to fly on their own, except for the Interim so far, which is, as Paul Tons explained a few meetings ago, a few years ago, the print newspaper, the news in print was going down the tube. The Cleveland Plain Dealer was one you told us about, and then, do you remember the other ones?
All kinds of them.
All kinds of them going down the tubes because everybody's reading their news electronically, and that's why LifeSite has been doing a great job.
Tom O'Pell, Tom doesn't even know what an online site looks like.
Tom doesn't even have a cell phone. What are you talking about? Okay, any comments or